We're here to talk to you about a game-changing technology. High bandwidth flash. Is that a good hook?
We were told we needed to seriously up our game in the enthusiasm department. And so there you have it. There was the attempt at upping the game in the enthusiasm department.
That was me being ultra enthusiastic.
In mocking imitation of you. My name's Casey, and I'm so excited.
Exactly. But we really are going to talk about high bandwidth flash. And maybe you're familiar with that. We talked about it with SanDisk not too long ago when we made SanDisk. Maybe we didn't make SanDisk cool again, but SanDisk is actually cool again. But before we get into it, I want to show you a little bit of a breakdown on our new research platform that you can find at chipstockinvestor.com.
Seriously, join Semiconductor Insider. We've got a lot of great stuff. You can get access to all of our research, weekly live events, and Q&A. We are working on new investment process tools like the DCF and reverse DCF calculator and tutorials on how to use that, like you see on most of our videos. And until April 15th,
you can get access to the Discord server. After that, we'll be closing it to new members. So make sure you check it out if that interests you. And the research platform is always available over at chipstockinvestor.com. So let's talk about the NAND market. Kind of a small group of players here. We have SK hynix, Micron, Samsung, Yangtze Memory in China, and then Kioxia and SanDisk, both of which had re-IPOs last year.
Yeah, that's a different topic. In fact, you can catch our entire memory industry breakdown from about a year ago right here and in the description below if you want more of an overview beyond just what the heck high bandwidth flash is. So those are the companies that make NAND flash. And what is NAND flash memory exactly? Well, it is a type of secondary or long-term storage. It's non-volatile storage, so it doesn't need active power all the time, doesn't need to be refreshed. And so in the memory hierarchy, NAND flash competes with the older technology, hard disk drives, HDDs. They're at the bottom. Long-term storage, where very, very high capacity, lots of data can be stored in these things, but the bandwidth isn't so high, the speed isn't so high. Typically, there is a bit of a trade-off in computer memory where, yes, if you need higher capacity, the trade-off is lower speed. If you speed things up, well, there's lower capacity. Something we also talked about earlier this year in breaking this down a bit more. Here's one of the little infographics we use to talk about this. So over on the left is actual on-chip memory, the SRAM. These are built into the transistors themselves on things like the GPU chips. The intermediate memory tends to be DRAM and the very famous DRAM product, HBM, high bandwidth memory, usually co-packaged very close to the logic processor. And then, of course, long-term storage there on the right. There's the HDDs with all the little mechanical parts and pieces with the little magnetic platter that is used to store large amounts of information. And then the newer technology, the semiconductor product, the chip product, NAND flash, and SSDs, devices that use NAND flash to make a long-term storage device. So that's a quick little overview of the memory hierarchy, the different memory products. What is high bandwidth flash, HBF?
That's the exciting part. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Let's try to break this down with the help of some images from SanDisk. On the left side, we have NAND flash systems optimized for cost and for data storage. But then on the right, they're essentially breaking those NAND chips up a bit and optimizing it for speed, increasing the bandwidth.
And here there might be a little bit of misunderstanding among investors that somehow HBF, high bandwidth flash, is going to become a direct competitor with HBM, high bandwidth memory. They're in the middle of the hierarchy, a type of DRAM product. And that's not exactly true. What this is really ultimately going to end up being is maybe something intermediate in between HBM in the middle and NAND flash for long-term storage. So kind of like a compromise where you're still getting a lot of data storage capacity, but higher bandwidth that allows the HBF chips to get co-packaged close to a GPU. And this is increasingly important because of, well, you guessed it, AI, and specifically AI inference, because AI inference is no longer about networking lots of GPUs together to train the AI. Once the AI software gets put to work, it needs access to lots of data to provide the output that users need. And so if you can get more of that data close to the GPU to serve you and I, the user of the AI software, that much better, then that's ultimately the goal here.
Here's what the HBF stack looks like.
Does this look a little bit familiar? If you've looked at cubes of HBM stacked up next to GPUs before, this little side diagram might rhyme a bit. So how does this work? SanDisk's partnership with Kioxia makes the actual 3D NAND flash wafers. That's that BiCS technology that you see there. That stands for bit cost scaling. And then the NAND flash is stacked on top of each other using SanDisk's CBA wafer bonding technology to make up to 16 chip tall HBF cubes. And then similar to HBM, you have a logic die on the bottom that controls the input and output of data and communication with the GPU or CPU or whatever the logic chip is co-packaged next to it. You have a Casey's Kitchen analogy here.
I guess this is like stacking pancakes.
Exactly.
But how does this help with the memory bottleneck? Although you said, Nick, that the goal is not to replace HBM, but rather to augment this storage. That's exactly what you can see on the right side there with a GPU with HBM memory as well as HBF memory. Exponential increase in storage capacity.
Obviously, HBF is not going to compete with HBM on bandwidth speed. Still very much going to be a necessary memory technology for a long time to come. SanDisk has a couple of white papers out on the real goal of this, and they refer to the memory wall. The fact that these GPUs, when used for inference, are basically running out of data. And the last thing you want, if you're spending lots of money on a GPU-powered data center system, is those GPUs sitting around idle, waiting for data to arrive. And so this is the idea here. It's not to compete with the HBM, but just get more data closer to those GPUs over time. Casey, this all sounds incredibly exciting. It sounds like we should back up the truck and buy as much SanDisk as we can because this is a total game changer, right?
Not so fast. Take it easy. Actually, this technology, they expect to not be ready fully until 2030. While they're shipping some samples in 2026, adoption, where they're making actual revenue for this technology, is still some time out.
And that's not to say that HBF won't contribute anything whatsoever to SanDisk, as well as one of its other development partners, SK hynix. Yes, that's right. They are standardizing this technology so that other players in the memory industry can also contribute and participate in the growth as well. That is part of the R&D, specifically the D and R&D, with the SanDisk and SK hynix are working on together. They're shipping samples. Customers will start buying and figuring out how to implement these in their data center systems, how to build new systems, including HBF. It's just going to take some time.
So in the meantime, where could you think about stashing some cash for the memory market, other than some of these top memory players that are enjoying a ton of momentum right now? We're going to beat this drum again, guys. The Fab Five.
Yeah, that is still one fantastic way to invest in all sorts of hardware development, especially the Fab Five, the biggest five companies that provide the wafer fab equipment and packaging equipment. They are responsible for developing a lot of the IP, of the manufacturing process, intellectual property, a lot of good stuff happening. And I think that's where we should leave this off.
Speaking of that, we've got some excellent content on a company in the Fab Five that skews towards the memory market, Lam Research. Watch that video right now.